spreading blankets on the beach.
You just have to hear the rest of this.
This is the first face that I saw. I think I was blind before I met you. And I don't know where I am, I don't know where I've been, but I know where I want to go.
Okay, so as you can see, I love that song, and that's a new song for me. Thank you to Esther Magasis. She's with Yakima County. That song is First Day of My Life by Bright Eyes. Esther listened to the song a lot as an emotionally volatile teenager, and even though she had not listened to it as much in adulthood, she found herself revisiting it when her daughter was born with a whole new meaning. In the days and weeks and months after her daughter's birth, Esther said she found herself coming back to this song often as she held her in her nursery, and it means a lot more to Esther now. She says the first day of her daughter's life felt a lot like the first day of her life as well. So thank you, Esther. I looked at her, I said, okay, you cry, I cry, because y'all know that's easy for me just to cry. Okay, so I want to thank today's greeter, David Cobia. David is with Clifton Larson Allen, so thank you for greeting today. And next up to share some inspiration, I would like to welcome up Alex Ditto. And Alex is with Edward Jones. Alex.
Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. You can be seated. Thanks. Okay, I got a question for you all. What is something, and I just want you to think about it, what is something that you have spent money on last year that brought you joy? If I took a poll in the room, I'd be willing to bet that most of you would describe an experience, probably with a loved one, rather than any material purchase that you made. Maybe a couple people, I don't know, maybe a Corvette or something, I don't know. But when my wife and I were newly married, she had her sights on going to Paris for her final college internship. When she got the position, she told me, I'm going to Paris, and whether or not you come is your choice. It was a little out of my comfort zone, but I thought the idea of going to Paris would be awesome. I just didn't know how to make it work. I was, new in my career, and how could I, just put my, my career on pause like that. But somehow I convinced my brand new employer that I could be an asset working remote for 3 months, and we were off. Those 3 months transformed me and became defining for my wife and I's relationship as well. I love when my phone shows old photos from our travels or when we cook a meal that we learned to make in Europe. Those memories that we created continue to yield joy in the form of what Bill Perkins calls memory dividends. In his book, Die with Zero, Perkins explains the concept of memory dividends as the lasting satisfaction we get from meaningful experiences. I'll say that one more time. So a memory dividend is the lasting satisfaction we get from meaningful experiences. It is said love is spelled T-I-M-E, time. While time is fleeting, the memories that we create with our loved ones will outlive the moments themselves. My invitation to you is to be intentional about how you spend your time and resources. Read, maybe for the third time, one more book to your child before bed. That's my stage right now. Share a meal with a neighbor you've been meaning to get to know, or take the trip you've always dreamed of, or bring the grandkids together. It doesn't matter if these experiences are big or small. The memories you create and the dividends they'll pay will be priceless. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Guests today, could I have all of our guests stand so we can recognize you today as our MVPs? There we go. Thank you for being here. For those of you that don't know me, I am Sherry Bissell. I am the 107th president of this original, the OG Rotary Club. We were chartered in 1919. I'm also the 5th woman president, so I always have to get that in there. Thank you for the woo. We are the 22nd largest club in the United States. But wait, there's more. We are the 37th largest club in the world. So, yeah. That is a big deal. That is a very big deal. We have something for everyone in this club. We are not a closed club. We do not have a religious or political affiliation. You do not have to have a specific occupation or anything. Everyone is welcome. So if you are interested, grab that little blue card on the table and talk to one of us. We'd love to have you on our team. We'll draft you in a minute. Okay, blue badges. I have 2 blue badges up here. So I would like to welcome up Paul Needham and Rebecca Thornton, please. So Rebecca is with Central Washington University Foundation. So there you are.
Take that back.
Yes, we will take this back. And Paul is with Yakima Canine Club. So there you go.
Thank you.
Nice job getting those blues. They are no longer red rookies. Okay. I have a couple of save the dates. So we will have a historical perspective on Wednesday, November 12th, 5:30 p.m. at YDC. This will be about the Yakima Nation on the importance of salmon in their culture. We've had some really great ones. This one is no exception. This will be fabulous as well. Wednesday, November 12th, 5:30. We will also have a second chance social a week later on Wednesday, November 19th at 5:30, and that will be at Westwood Golf Course at their new cool driving range. We had that program earlier this year. I will tell you, you don't have to be a golfer to go. You can just go and laugh at all the golfers in their swing. I mean, but there'll be food, so it's lots of fun. It is beautiful to hang out there as well. So we look forward to that and to see you there. Really quick, I want to give a congratulations to President-elect John Cooper for his latest very prestigious Washington State Tourism Hall of Leadership Award that he received. So nice job, John Cooper. Very well deserved, very well deserved. Okay, unless I forgot something, and I don't want to get a penalty flag. Okay, it's time for Sergeant at Arms with Jadine Corcoran, and Jadine is with Marsh McLennan Agency.
Thank you, President Bissell and Coach. Hello, everyone. Fellow Rotarians and guests, and I'm happy to say that all the funds raised today, so get your dollars ready, will be going to Operation Harvest via our President Bissell just told me this today. So let's raise some money. Our speaker today, Dr. David Knight, inspired me to use my time as your Sergeant of Arms to honor education. As Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And it certainly changed my world. I was a student in the first Head Start program here in the Yakima Valley, now known as EPIC. And it changed my world in many ways. First and foremost, it prepared me for school, of course, but also for life. It gave me the head start I needed in order to keep up with and even catch some of the students that were coming from educated families. And I'm happy to say that goes on today. I went on to become the first of my family and generations to graduate from college, University of Idaho, go Vandals. So would all of those of you that are in education please stand for a moment? Thank you for your service. Everyone else, please pay $1. That's not a mass fine. That's not a mass fine. Hey, now. Dr. Knight is director of the Center for the Study of Teaching and Policy and Center for Early Childhood Policy and Equity at the University of Washington College of Education and serves as Associate Professor of Education, Finance, and Policy. So would all of those here today who have graduated from University of Washington please stand? Go Huskies! Come on, stand up. And if everyone else would pay $1. Thank you. Today, our very own Dr. Trevor Green, our superintendent of Yakima School Districts, will be introducing our speaker. Dr. Green is an alumnus of Yakima's A.C. Davis High School and is the first student to graduate from Yakima School District and return to lead as superintendent. We are blessed to have him. If you've attended Davis High School, or previously known as Yakima High for those of you more experienced folks, please stand for a moment. Thank you, and all the rest of you, please pay $1. Oh, okay, I love it. Thank you, seriously. Davis was okay, Eisenhower was better. Anywho, wait until you hear this. So Dr. Green is bilingual, biliterate, and is currently learning a third language, Japanese. What an overachiever. For those of you who are bilingual, please raise $1 proudly and pay $1. Raise your hand and pay $1 if you're bilingual. Thank you. Education is truly the backbone of society, and as John Adams said, there are two educations. One should teach us how to make a living, and the other to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Jadine. Nice job. I also want to point out really quick, Sharon Miracle looks like she's the only one that's dressed for Halloween. So I don't know. We need to do something. I don't know what that is, but she's a cheerleader from, is that Richland High School? Maybe she'll be the entertainment after the meeting. She can do some cheers for us. You in? Okay, she's in. Now to introduce our speaker, I would like to invite up Dr. Trevor Green. He is with the Yakima School District. Trevor.
Thank you, Rotarians. That reminded me of another quote. It was, I believe it was Mark Twain that said, "Don't let your schooling interfere with your education." So I think we all have that opportunity ongoing as well. It's my honor today to introduce Dr. David S. Knight, an education finance scholar and policy advisor, also a dear friend of mine, so please do not hold that against him. Dr. Knight is the leading voice in public education finance whose research is shaping statewide and national conversations about how schools are funded and what it means for equity and opportunity. He holds a PhD in educational policy and a master's in economics from the University of Southern California. He is a fellow at the National Education Policy Center, a trustee for the National Education Finance Academy, and formerly director of the Center for Educational Research and Policy Studies at the University of Texas at El Paso. He's a trusted resource for policymakers and advocacy organizations. Dr. Knight's research has been cited in legislative testimony and agency reports. He's frequently cited, quoted in the Seattle Times as a local and national expert, and his clear explanations really help translate complex issues into something that is more understandable for people like me, but I'm going to geek out a little bit today because it's exciting to have somebody talk about what it means financially and how it affects the state with our current funding model and all that that entails. So please join me in welcoming Dr. David Knight.
Hi
everybody. It's a real honor to be here, and I just want to start by thanking Dr. Green for that wonderful introduction, and thanking the Rotary for this opportunity to speak with you all, and thank everybody that came here today to be here. Let me see if, one question that always comes up is, will these slides be made available? So I did put out this QR code that links to the slides. I'm going to show this QR code at the end again, so you will have that available if interested. I'm going to start with a little bit of a personal background. I've been at the University of Washington. This is my 7th year, and prior to that, as you heard, I was at the University of Texas, El Paso. And I received my PhD in education policy from the University of Southern California. I've been settled in Shoreline, Washington now. I have 2 kids, a 6 and a 9-year-old, and they are in Shoreline Public Schools. And so we really enjoy the state of Washington and think strongly about the public school system here. I did bring a, let's see, picture of my 6 and 9-year-old, but now there they are. The girls are doing hockey now, and so JoJo is in the red helmet, and that's Lainey in the black helmet with the Kraken Center. Okay, so I'm going to talk primarily about 2 big topics. So one, I'm going to ask this question of, is the school finance system in Washington equitable, adequate, and efficient? And sure, yeah. And then maybe anticipating the answer to that first question, let's assume there's room for improvement. What can the research tell us about how to make things better, essentially? And I'm going to make the argument that for the state right now, one of the most sort of what I would call the lowest hanging fruit to improve the system and make it more equitable and efficient would be to implement something we often call targeted investments, but essentially to substantially increase funding for the public school system, but target those funds to the contexts and uses that we know work. And so that's going to be the overriding argument for this presentation. Dr. Green mentioned I might want to start off with a little bit of just kind of 101 background on school finance. After this next slide, I am going to be a little bit in the weeds. That's a warning. So this is just my kind of background information on public school finance in Washington. And the first thing you have to know, is there is this thing called McCleary v. Washington, which was our state's Supreme Court lawsuits that resulted in our finance system in 2012 being ruled unconstitutional. And so what happened was a group of families and school districts looked at what was in our state constitution, the language there, what the positive rights listed there, and sued the state alleging that there was not enough sufficient funding in the public system. And so those plaintiffs were victorious, and it resulted in a large increase in funding starting in around 2012 and all the way up until around 2018-19. Our research has looked at where all that money went. A lot of it went to teacher salaries, which was backfilled a lot of sort of underpayment that had been historically going on. But all of that context took place just before the pandemic. And so at that time, a lot of districts were having financial challenges, and then the pandemic hits, and one of the things that happened was the federal government injected a lot of stimulus into our system. So the second thing you have to know about K-12 school finance is that most of the money comes from state and local sources. Very little of it comes from federal sources. So when we talk about school education policy and education finance, we're looking at state policy, which is why the federal stimulus created this thing we call the fiscal cliff. But essentially that big stimulus came in, and then the money expired in September of 2024. And so districts had to spend their federal stimulus funds, and so there was a large drop-off of that stimulus funding that just happened last year. So that's a second challenge to school districts. A third thing that comes up a lot is this problem of declining enrollment that a lot of districts are dealing with. Essentially, if you're a district experiencing declining enrollment, you are losing students, which means you're reducing costs, but some of your costs are fixed in the short term. And the way that we allocate funding in Washington and every other state in the country, it's based on a per student model. That's just what every state does. So your funding is primarily based on your enrollment level. And so when you have declining enrollment, you're going to see a decline in funding. And but your funding is going to be going down faster than the costs. So and this is, if you look nationally, we're experiencing declining birth rates, and public school enrollment is down overall nationally. So you're just seeing in the headlines a lot of issues with school districts struggling with budget cuts, and that's one of the big reasons why. The third point on there is high inflation. That one I don't need to say too much about. There was 3 straight years of really high inflation. Inflation is the growth of prices, and now inflation has calmed back down, but the prices are still really high. It's still really expensive to buy eggs. School districts have the same issues, and the inflation was so fast, it was faster than the state funding could even keep up with it. The last thing that is specific to Washington is that as a state, we haven't fundamentally overhauled our school funding system since, depending on how you define this, 1977. So 1977, we had a major state lawsuit that again went in favor of the plaintiffs, and the state legislators at that time were required to redesign the system. When plaintiffs and school districts challenged our system again as part of McCleary, they were again victorious, but there were not big shifts to how we allocate funds. There was mostly just a big infusion of funding. So that gives you a little bit of context for why so many school districts are facing budgetary challenges today. This kind of gives us something to build from, and so, but we now want to talk about how we go from here, how we start to solve these problems. And so the first most fundamental thing we have to look at is what's in our state's constitution. And let me go back. The clickers are never my friend. The state constitution is Article 9, Section 1. This one sentence was really the driver of the entire McCleary v. Washington lawsuit. And it states that the state of Washington has a paramount duty to provide ample resources for education without distinction for student background. And I think it's important to recognize that this was written in 1889 as the state was gaining statehood. The federal government had just passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. And so a lot of activist groups, including African-American groups at the time, were pushing for strong constitutional commitments in their education, in their state constitutions, strong constitutional commitments. And so what they were able to do, this happened in many states. Washington's constitutional language is actually rated particularly strong in terms of what it guarantees. And so that same year as we were gaining our statehood, Washington held its first legislative session that created the Common School Fund. That's kind of the genesis of our school finance system in the state. And it wasn't until, as I mentioned, 1977 that we made sort of a big change to how we allocate resources. And then I listed out the other kind of big historical marker is 2012 when the McCleary decision came out. So that constitutional language is really important for building policy. And so I'll just say one last note about how we think about effective policymaking in the kind of school finance world. And so what we would always talk about is a guiding principle for designing policy is to think about past and present. And so people might have seen this little graphic, but there's sort of a downward sloping line, a downward sloping ground you see, and that's meant to reflect the historical barriers that different communities have faced in this country. And then the upward sloping fence in the picture is meant to symbolize present day systems of oppression that sort of are vestiges of that history. So this is kind of used in different contexts. It has a real application in school finance, which is a little more wonky. It's just that we know that the cost to provide equal educational opportunity differs substantially across school districts. So when you have a school district that is in a high poverty neighborhood, and often there's not as much healthcare services or grocery stores or other types of social services available, there might be high crime rates and other neighborhood challenges. And then you look at the schools, it costs more to provide the same level of opportunity as it does in more well-off neighborhoods. Even if the cost of living is higher there, so the salaries that you have to pay are higher, to provide the same amount of educational opportunity, it's a much higher cost in higher poverty contexts and higher poverty neighborhoods. That bears out in the research. So that's a few things about how we think about the design of policy. We have to talk about students. And the reason I'm talking about cost and the differences across contexts is because that brings the conversation about finance back to students. So this graph is basically the high school graduation rate over the past 6 years. And what you can see is it is slightly going up, which is a good sign. We're seeing slight increases in high school graduation rates. But the most recent year, I think it's around 83.6%. So that means that 16 or 17% of high school students are not finishing on time. And I think we could do better than that. But I want to show you this data in a slightly different way. So I'm going to show you the exact same data as this graph, but flipped around so that we can put, on the x-axis, I'm going to put the neighborhood poverty rate. And the y-axis is that same variable, high school graduation rate. And what you can very clearly see is this strong downward sloping line. And that's just to say that high school graduation rates are much higher in lower poverty, wealthier neighborhoods. And we can kind of, just to give a sense, each of these little circles is a school district. I put those little labels on there to kind of bring some reality to this, but I'm not calling out those school districts because if you look, most of them are right on the trend line. So they have high school graduation rates that are right in line with what we would expect given their context. So this is a big problem. And this is where I think we can start to talk about that first relatively flat line graph I showed you a second ago. There's something else that is important that helps us understand the role of context. In this next graph, it's the same data, but we've separated out students who are classified as low income from students who are classified as non-low income, and we put them on the same chart. And what you see are two downward sloping lines still. Both lines are downward sloping. So what that means is that even a student who's classified as non-low income in a high poverty context is not going to have as strong of outcomes as if they were in a wealthier, well-to-do neighborhood and context. And that has to do with all the services and how we think about those broader regions and all the resources that are available in those types of places. On the flip side, if you look at a low-income student who's in a low-poverty neighborhood, according to this graph, they're doing better. They're attending high schools with stronger graduation rates. And those are for that specific type of student. So it's now important to recognize what are we going to do about this and where does finance play into all this. And so one of the things we look at very carefully are high school graduation rates, but there are also predictors of high school graduation rates. So one variable, for example, is something we call the ninth grade on-track rate. It's the percentages of ninth graders who pass all their courses. And it turns out that's a really strong predictor of high school graduation rates. So we pay attention to ninth grade on-track rates. And it also turns out that a strong predictor of ninth grade on-track rates is regular attendance in middle school. And so, there we go. And regular attendance in middle school is predicated on strong elementary school learning opportunities. And so these things are all correlated, and I could produce those same graphs for all of these measures. And for me, what lies behind all of those different schooling outcomes that we're thinking about is the resources available at the actual school. And so money in that sense lies behind all of these issues when we're thinking about effective programming in schools. And so we need to talk, that's why we have to have a conversation about funding and money, and we have to talk about how the money is distributed across school districts. And that conversation needs to happen in the same time as we're looking at educational outcomes. If we only talk about the money side and we forget the students, then we're going to lose track of where the money should really be targeted. And if we only focus on students, we often forget to talk about the actual resources necessary to make the changes we want to see. The next parts are a little bit depressing, but I'm going to try to end it on a high note. But so, because I gave you the cliffhanger of what are we doing about this problem. But so this is a report from a very well-trusted national organization called Education Trust, and they do these rankings of states, and they came out with a report relatively recently called Equal is Not Enough. And they found that Washington ranks towards the middle or bottom in the extent to which we effectively target educational resources to school districts that serve high percentages of students of color, school districts that serve high percentages of multilingual learners, and high percentages of low-income students. People think and I even thought before I got here, I guess I had seen these rankings, but people think we're going to be on the very high end of those types of equity-based metrics, and we're actually not, for a couple different reasons. I'll explain why. But so this was a bit of a damning report for Washington. I'll just show you kind of where we fall nationally. So I put a little red box around Washington, and so this is each state is ranked according to the extent to which they target additional resources to the school districts that are most in need. In this graph, it's actually the percentage of students of color in each school district, but they do different versions for the percentage of low-income students and other metrics like that. So Washington is more towards the middle. You can see in the far right, there's states that are in the green, the blue, Minnesota, Ohio. It's not always a political issue. Sometimes it can be a red state. Wyoming has a really, really strong school finance system. They have a lot of oil there, so that helps. So sometimes natural resources play a role, but this is part of the problem that we're trying to solve in Washington right now, actually. So we can kind of look historically about what happened, because this report came out after the McCleary v. Washington lawsuit. So it's important to understand what exactly happened during McCleary. Okay, so that's what we tried to do in this graph. You can see we showed the first thing you should see here is a flat line going across and then a big increase. And the big increase is the McCleary v. Washington case. But on the x-axis of this graph, I have time, the years, and then the y-axis is the total per pupil state and local revenues. So you can think of that as education funding for each school district. And we differentiated school districts based on whether they were classified as high or low poverty school districts based on the students that they served. And so we would recommend the state target more of their educational dollars to high poverty contexts, and we would strongly urge them against having a disparity between these two types of districts. And there's other ways to define school districts, but what you should start to see in this graph, for about 2 decades prior to the McCleary v. Washington lawsuit, the two lines are pretty much parallel. If we added in federal funding, then the two lines would mostly be on top of each other, which means the districts would get about the same. And so I've often described our Washington's public school finance system as a flat funding model, because most districts get roughly the same amount of funding, more or less. And so that's why I'm saying here, these two, the black line and the gray line, with federal funding, they're pretty much on top of each other. Until we see the McCleary decision comes in December of 2012, and that's when the state starts to finally pass some laws to increase funding. And then the case was finally resolved just before the 18-19 school year, when the state Supreme Court had decided that the legislature had done enough, and they had passed a few laws. They didn't actually make big changes to how state dollars are allocated, but they put in a few things that caused this wedge. And so what you should see at the end of the graph is a pretty big gap between districts that we classify as high poverty versus low poverty. Yeah, and so that's I forgot how much this builds. So that's at the end of the graph, you see about a 17% funding gap between our wealthiest school districts and our lower poverty school districts. We also kind of break this down to state and local. So there's really just 3 sources of funding, right? Local, state, and federal. And federal dollars are not a big section of the money. So this is a state and local conversation. Washington actually gets a larger share of its funding from state dollars. But we just broke down that last graph into local and then state. What we found was that higher poverty districts saw pretty big increases in local dollars. The state came in and did this thing they called the levy swap, but they reduced the amount that local districts could generate from local tax elections, and they provided more state dollars. But in the end, this is the graph for state revenues. So the state dollars are actually allocated progressively with respect to household income, which just means I put the text in green to make it clear to people. But there's such a large disparity in local revenues, and this is true in every state, actually. The local revenues are generated from local property values, and that creates disparities. States have come in over time and made funding systems more progressive and more fair, basically, with respect to household income. But our system doesn't nearly go far enough to close that gap. So that's let me see if I can get this to click. Sorry, I've got those arrows. Okay, so that's so that where we are at with my first big question, which is how Washington's system allocates resources. And so just to summarize those 2 or 3 big points is that a lot of new money came into the system over the past 5 years. Every district did see increases, but a lot of that money went to teacher salaries. And now we have a system that allocates resources a little bit, I would say, regressive or largely when you add it all in together, it's essentially a flat funding model. And so that's kind of the takeaway from a lot of our research. And the second part of this talk, I just wanted to mention a little bit about the broader research area, because it turns out there was actually a big fight about what the role of money is in schools, and a lot of people argued that it doesn't really make a big difference, and a lot of the money is wasted, and a lot of the money doesn't actually move the needle in terms of student outcomes. So that's a huge research area, and there's evidence on both sides. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that research in the next few slides, because one of the kind of big consensus findings is that money does really matter. It makes a big difference. So I'm just going to walk you through these 3 studies. The first one is close to home. It was a research team I was on, and we were looking at the impact of those McCleary dollars on the teacher labor market in Washington. So I'm going to say a little bit about that study. The second study is sort of the study of all studies. It's a massive meta-analysis looking at the impact of money on schools. And then the third study I'm going to talk to you about is talks about the impact of school bonds. Okay, so starting with that first study, colleagues of mine and I gathered data from the OSPI and the Department of Revenue, and we looked at some of those graphs I was just showing you and tried to make sense of what was the impact of the teacher salary increases that happened through McCleary. We landed on kind of 3 big findings. Number 1, I mentioned already, which is that a lot of the new money went to teacher salaries, but we found that the money disproportionately benefited more experienced teachers, and also rather than at the cost of salary increases for more junior and mid-career teachers. Our second big finding was that teachers working in lower poverty settings saw bigger salary increases, and that aligns with some of the other things we were finding with how money had been allocated over time. What was the impact of the salary increases? We actually found it reduced turnover across districts. So the districts that gave the largest teacher salary increases saw reductions in their teacher turnover, the rates at which teachers were leaving for other districts. And those effects were largest in junior and mid-career teachers. And that's a big cost for districts when they have to deal with teacher turnover. And so it really mattered that money seemed to have a positive impact. And your junior and mid-career teachers are the ones that are growing and the ones you really want to hold on to often. But the other finding we saw was that more senior teachers were less likely to retire, basically, after the pay increases. And we think that probably led to additional financial challenges for a lot of the districts that provided big salary increases. And remember, that all happened just before the pandemic, so it really complicated things. That was the work we did. We're now looking at some of the impacts on student outcomes, but that's a really hard question to answer. And so I often point people to this meta-analysis conducted by Carabo Jackson and his colleague. And essentially what they did was they gathered up over about a decade of research all of the most credibly causal studies, so all of the best studies that are available, and they sort of put them all together and calculate the overall impacts of funding increases. And what they found was that a $1,000 increase in per pupil spending causes about a 0.3 standard deviation in test scores, and it also leads to about a 2.8 percentage point increase in high school graduation and college going. And so this study helped contribute to what was a kind of a debate for several decades about what is the real role of funding. There's now really more of a consensus in the field that money really matters and that increasing funding for K through 12 schools is going to have a positive impact. The problem is there's a lot of there's a lot of variation in the impacts, essentially. So it really, really matters how the money is allocated across contexts, and once it gets there, how it's spent. And so that's kind of the part we don't know as much about, is how to allocate the dollars once they get there. We do have some evidence about from the research about what might work. The last study I'm going to tell you about is this one by Barbara Biasi that's just come out, and one of the problems with all of the studies I just told you about is they looked at where money is allocated and where it has the biggest impact. And one of their big findings is that money goes further when it's targeted, and when it's targeted to higher poverty contexts and places that historically haven't had as much spending. But what are those districts supposed to do once the money gets there? And so there's less research on the actual uses of funds. So this study was really important because they looked at the bond language. They looked at the language in the bonds that school districts were putting out, and then they tracked, they were able to look at the districts that barely passed bonds to barely failed, and looked at that randomness to try to get at a causal estimate of the impact of money. It's not enough to just do these correlational studies that you often hear about, because anybody can find a high spending school that doesn't have great outcomes, and anybody can find a school that isn't spending very much but has great outcomes. That's kind of the black box that we're, as researchers, we're dealing with. So I'm breezing over the complicated methodological and randomization that we do to get at these results. But they were using the elections of bonds as randomization. But what they found was quite interesting. Number one, that the bonds, when they passed, they mattered, and they helped schools do their job, but in interesting ways. So they found increases in test scores over time, but only when the bonds were spent on essential infrastructure like air quality and HVAC and those sorts of things. And then they didn't find as much increases on things like athletic facilities. But then they considered, well, let's look at home values. There is some research showing that school quality is capitalized into home values. So the home values are worth more where the schools are good. So they wanted to know, when school districts pass bonds, what happens with home values. And it turned out that essential infrastructure didn't have a big impact on home values, but the athletics facilities did. And so how the funds are spent is going to impact communities in different ways. In all the cases they looked at, they were finding positive impacts. So it's sort of up to the community how they would want to allocate the dollars. That's actually the point of U.S. education, is that we have those sorts of fiscal flexibility. Gives researchers opportunities to understand what works and how. So those are 3 studies I wanted to walk you through, just to kind of summarize where all that lands. Number one is that we have finally reached a consensus as researchers that money matters, and but it's really important how the money is allocated across contexts, and then how the money's spent once it gets there. And then crucially, we know that the cost of education differs a lot across contexts. But, and I mentioned that earlier, that for a variety of reasons, we should be targeting resources to higher poverty contexts because it costs more to provide the same level of equal educational opportunity. The challenge is we don't really know how much more it costs. So we don't have a sense of how progressive the system should be. But we do have some estimates, and we have a lot of different research papers that I can link to. I've linked to in my extra slides, but I just wanted to leave you with this closing thought, which is that we have to decide, we have the luxury and the privilege of deciding what kind of education system we want for this country, and what kind of future we want. And I think that decision-making and that sort of group thinking happens in rooms like this. So it's such an honor to be here and share a very small snippet of some of our work. And so I just thank you for this opportunity, and I really appreciate it. So thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Am I first? So the interesting presentation, the first graphs that you showed that showed the decline of outcomes with funding values and coming to the conclusion that that was related to district funding. But isn't it just as plausible that the district funding is a straight line and the problem is really the poor districts don't have money at the household level to invest in education? They have to work more, their parents are away from home more, they're not so engaged, they themselves aren't educated to such a high level. What they really need is not to support the district, we need to support the homes that are sending the kids to the school.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that question, which is, and everybody shows these achievement gaps, and Sean, if you really want to delve deep on this, Sean Reardon at Stanford University has this, a couple different New York Times op-eds that shows these achievement gaps, and the question is, are schools alone supposed to solve all of these issues and all of these massive disparities that we see across neighborhoods and schools and individual people? And it's a great question. I think I'm seeing two sides of it, which is we often put too much faith in schools to solve all of the problems, and we think that they can do it all, and we don't pay attention to what I think you're alluding to, which is that all the other social services that are available and ways that we can help families outside of school. And so the trouble is, so when you look to the research evidence, and one of the things that works is just giving people cash. And if we've done sort of these cost-benefit analyses, and we look at things like high school graduation rates and how that's related to the earned income tax credit. And something like that is a way to just transfer cash to low-income individuals, but or to do other sorts of incentives to try to motivate those sorts of things. But on the other hand, and that's part of this argument that what is really the role of money? But some of that argument took place in the courts because these are a lot of legal decisions about how much we should be spending in schools. But some of the best evidence we have about actually improving outcomes for students turns out to be school funding. And so there are other positive uses. One example is early childhood investments. So there are benefit cost studies there that say each dollar we invest in early childhood produces $3 to $4 of economic return. And then we compare that to something like corporate tax breaks. And we know even Greg Mankiw, the economist who wrote the book to Introductory Economics, he will tell you a $1 tax reduction produces about 33 cents on the dollar for economic revenue. So there are economic benefits to tax cuts, but they're much smaller than the economic returns you get from early childhood investments, for example. So I agree that we sometimes think that it all boils down to schools. I think that's a problematic assumption, and it's a bigger societal problem. I would say. So I would agree with you on many of those points.
First of all, thank you for coming and sharing your information with us today. And I have a two-part question. In your research, why is it that the percentage of students at grade level in math and English or reading is so low? Why is that? And number two, and this is the most important one, is what specific programs, this may be Dr. Green's answer, but what specific programs are being implemented in Yakima and the state of Washington to solve this problem rather than just throwing money at it?
Yeah. Part of the percentage of students who are rated proficient is something that educational psychologists and people who do these tests make these determinations of what is exactly proficient. And the rates are always surprisingly low. And so I do know that there's a lot of comparisons for Washington's educational outcomes to other states. And there's only really one test, it's called the NAEP, that allows us to compare across states. And on those metrics, Washington looks fairly strong in many cases. Under our own tests, which I think you're talking about, the proficiency rates are quite low. And so I don't know, I'm not an educational psychologist, and I don't have a good sense of why sometimes states honestly will just redefine what they call proficient, and then proficiency goes up. So they've defined proficiency a certain way, and we're not hitting that mark. Why is that, and what programs are we using to fix the issue? I would just say there's a lot of different programs that we know are effective. There's one that targets ninth graders that I've been more involved with that's called Ninth Grade Success. And what it does is it leverages data so that success teams working in schools meet once every 2 weeks. They look at data and they find students that are falling through the cracks and they bring them in for one-on-one meetings. And that's sort of, we now have better data systems in school, and we can find the kids who are having lower and they're not looking at test scores. They look at attendance, grades, and behavioral outcomes. And so they call them the ABC outcomes. And they identify students before they fall behind. That's ninth grade being that critical year. At the earlier grades, there's a lot of this conversation about the science of reading and versus using context clues, and so there's a lot of literacy initiatives happening. And if you go in and talk to educators and even I would say probably system leaders, a lot of those programs, if we look at why they didn't work, they'll often point to resources and time. It's actually, more often than not, it's time. People didn't have to have time to implement it with fidelity or implement it with success. And time essentially is money because we're talking about staff time. And so if we had, the way to produce more time in schools is to add more resources. So it's not at all just about money. It's everything to do with how the money's spent. But if you don't have the money, you can't spend it. And you can't make important resource trade-offs. We want schools to innovate and make trade-offs and try out different things, and they have to have adequate funding to do that.
Thank you so much, and I want to say thank you to Dr. Green. Even though Yakima was sort of low on those graphs, right, we have a lot of challenges here, and you do an excellent job, so I just want to recognize that in this talk. So where I work, we actually hold the contract for Kittitas and Yakima counties for birth to 3 and the early intervention services. So when you talk about early childhood supports, there are challenges because while we provide services to those kids that are under 3, then there's a big cliff when they turn 3 and they drop off, and the school districts aren't adequately funded and can't support enough of what the children need as they're going into schools. Earlier this week, I was in a meeting with the Department of Health, and 1 in 4 children now in Washington, or 1 in 4 in Washington State, it's 27%, are children with special health care needs. That's up from 1 in 5, which was about 18% 3 years ago, and that's a significant change and a huge burden for the schools. So my question is, are you aggregating this data and having any kind of complex index scores for students who are from low income, also are monolingual Spanish speakers in the family or other languages, and also children with special health care needs, because I didn't see any of that on here, and that's a significant burden to the families and to the schools.
Yes, thank you for that question, and I appreciate you pointing out the things that are happening at Yakima Public Schools, because there's a lot of amazing things, and I talk so much about U.S. Census poverty rates and neighborhood poverty, but I didn't say much else about other indicators of need, and I would say that there's a couple different challenges here, and the biggest challenge is the state what the state legislators are going to need to do. And what they need to do is assess those types of needs, because something like special education, for example, and a lot of these things, they affect everybody, and they affect all school districts. You can go into the wealthiest school districts, and they're going to have low incidence, high cost, high need special education students. They're going to have students classified as low income. There's different challenges in different contexts. I would say, so we use this U.S. Census measure, poverty, as a proxy, and it's idealized to capture a lot of different things that are happening, and it's correlated with a lot of different outcomes and a lot of student needs, but it's not the end-all be-all. And sometimes we exchange it for other measures like household income or county birth weight is if you looked at county birth weight is a pretty good predictor of a lot of other outcomes like that. And so absolutely, it's not all about the neighborhood poverty rate, but that's just a strong indicator of a lot of other things. And those other things often are actually more important. The U.S. Census has really good data systems, and so that's why we use it. It's annual data that's for all 12,000 school districts in the country, 295 school districts in Washington. So it's clean data that's really nice. We know it's correlated with things we can't measure quite as well. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Last question. I know some of you have more questions, so Dr. Knight, are you able to stay after?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Anthony.
All right, thank you, Dr. Knight, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Green, for all the work that you do. So my question is related to how this data is being leveraged to either defend this current administration's perception and view on the traditional methods of education, particularly around public education. How is this data being leveraged and used to, justify the need for public education? Or is it being used to do that?
Fantastic question. I would say that state legislators are looking carefully at this data and other data, and I would say that there are competing perspectives about what the fundamental problems are with our state's funding model. And right now, I think I mentioned that thing about it's been 30 some odd years until we've had a major overhaul, and we're due. And so there are actually, I think there's a frenzy right now to get input and to figure out what is the best way forward. And so I haven't changed my message about all of these studies that we've been doing the last few years, and I'm hoping this message lands, but there are multiple task forces that are either legislatively created or organically, and all kind of convening groups looking at data and trying to unpack this. And I would say that I have a evidence-based perspective on how we should move forward, and that there's other evidence-based perspectives on that might be a little bit different. But these, to my mind, are the most important issues, and so this absolutely is being looked at, and this is the most important data. This is the data we look at: educational outcomes, funding, and spending, and then the financial solvency of our school districts. So, yeah, it's being taken up in a lot of different spaces, I would say.
Thank you for sticking around and for being here today, Dr. Knight. Okay, I'm going to end with my play of the day for you, which is the strength of the team lies within the individual, and the strength of the individual lies within the team. So the strength of the team is each individual member. A team success is built upon the unique talents, the skills, hard work of every member on the team. That's all of us, right? All of us on the Rotary team. The strength of each member is the team, so individuals perform at a higher level when they're part of a supportive team. That's us. That's us. That's our Rotary team. We have a shared purpose. We feel empowered to do our best, of course, and to motivate each other. This is what we do in our club. We are a team that unites for good. So I thought that was very... our club, I guess. That quote is pretty much our club. Okay. Next week's program, on November 6th, for the first of our Native American Heritage Month celebration, we will have Angelito Campobasa with Arts Washington Tribal Cultural Affairs. On the 13th, we'll have a Veterans Day program with the U.S. Army Command Sergeant Major Anton Ruffin with the Yakima Training Center. And then on the 20th, this will be our second Native American Heritage Month celebration speaker, which will be Kip Ramsey with the Ramsey family and the Yakima Nation history. We're here at the Convention Center for all three of these, and I will tell you that we are very, very fortunate to have all three of these speakers. So shout out real quick to team members and program chairs, Danielle Lyson, Charlie Robin, and Stephen Gustafson for working so hard on programs. Thank you for that. They are bringing something for everyone. I say it at the mic all the time, and they are. They're bringing something for everyone on this team, and you don't want to miss those three programs, and bring guests. We have 14 squares left on the football board, I am told by... Oh, I'm just kidding. And I don't get a penalty flag for that because nobody updated me, so... Just saying, we have 3 squares left on that football board, so somebody go out and buy the last 3, please. That money goes to Rotary charities. Committee meetings today, there will be a World Community Service meeting with Teresa Pritchard in Conference Room 1. Is that it, Carolyn? Okay. Great job on your blue badges to Paul and Rebecca. And thank you all for choosing Rotary today. And with that, this game is over.